leave things better than you found them, right? So you get given a task, do it, make sure you've done that task, that the next person who comes, maybe you've made it more efficient. So always things leave better than you find them,
Welcome to another episode of the Dealmaker Diary. Today, I'm with David Mparutsa, the man who is backing African SMEs that others say are too risky. David, welcome.
Thank you, Yatin.
Tell our audience, where did you grow up?
Yeah, Yatin. So I was born in Zimbabwe, and I moved to what was then Mparutsa when I was 12 years old, and that later became South Africa, I think in 1994. So my youth was spent in Zimbabwe, first 12 years, and then I did high school in Mparutsa in the northwest province.
Excellent. Now, what did young David want to be at, say, age 12? What did you think of?
Young David, like many other boys, very keen sports person. Yeah, so early on, I wanted to go into professional sports. I wanted to play professional basketball. Unfortunately, I didn't grow to be 6'3", so I had to come up with plan B. Funny enough, though, when I was in school, I took a keen interest in accounting, in business studies, in commerce, and those types of subjects. So I always knew plan A, professional sports, plan B was accounting. Plan A failed spectacularly, and thankfully enough, plan B came through okay.
Wow, yeah, and glad for Absa and the world it did.
Absolutely.
Brilliant, man. And who inspired you growing up as a young lad?
Yeah, so as a young lad, I think I came from quite a close-knit family. I think my parents did instill a lot of values around, hard work, giving back. So my parents, I think, were an inspiration at an early age. But I'm also the youngest of 4 siblings. So, I've got a brother and 2 elder sisters. And I suppose, at a young age, those were kind of like the people that you looked up to. So, I ended up playing the same sports that my brother did. I ended up studied what he studied as well. So really looked up to my older siblings from an early age.
And now you run one of Africa's largest, or a division of Africa's largest banks. You're a head of enterprise and supply chain development with a Pan-African mandate. That's quite a mammoth task. What drives you in this role?
Yeah, it's a very unique role, Yatin. The fact that you get a chance to work with corporate organizations and their value chain. So you work across corporate banking as well as business banking. You work with all the different products, whether it's trade products, whether it's commercial asset finance, whether it's term lending. You work across all sectors. So it's mining, it's FMCG, it's the telcos. So it's a very unique position. It's a fascinating position. So the drive is easy because of the exposure. And to be honest with you, if I had a blank piece of paper and somebody said, write a job description for yourself, I never could have come up with this. So in a very fortunate position, and that's what inspires me.
And for young professionals out there listening and wanting to get into this space, what does it take?
Yeah, it takes some hard yards. So I've been working now, I think 25 years, somewhere around there. And I didn't just end up here. I think I did 5 years in audit. I did 12 years in finance. I think I did about a year in risk, and then eventually ended up here, right? So you've got to do the hard yards up front. You're not going to get the role that you want on day one. You've got to do the hard yards up front. And then I think what's also key is you've got to put your hand up for things that are going to differentiate you. I remember when I joined Absa, not a lot of people were keen for these Africa type roles, the travel, the uncertainty of Africa, but I was passionate for it, right? So I put my hand up, and I think that's what differentiated me from my early career here at Absa, and I've gone on to build a career in Africa over the past 18 years.
Fantastic. Now, your career arc is quite inspiring, from audit in PwC to the trading desk at JP Morgan, and here now in this role. Yeah. What foundational skills did those earlier career choices give you that are paying off today?
Yeah. Audit, I think it's such a key skill. The fact that you or doing articles, let me say, the fact that you get to go to a lot of companies, inspect the books, interact with CEOs and CFOs and audit committees, it actually gives you such a grounding when you then, go out into your professional or your other professional career. So I just felt the early skills, that I got from my articles and from my audit were so key. Things like report writing, things like, doing variance analysis and these types of things. So really grounded me. I was fortunate enough also to do a bit of lecturing. So working with very young kids, 18 and 19-year-olds. But I think that also gave me kind of a knack for public speaking, for standing in front of large audiences and having to deliver a message. So really enjoy that. Both my parents are teachers, so I suppose I get some of that inspiration from my parents being teachers.
Yeah, no, I've known you for many years, and the one thing that stands out for me, I always said you are an excellent communicator at an executive level. How important is that skill?
Very key, very key. Because regardless of what you're doing, you've got stakeholders, whether they're clients, whether they're internal stakeholders. Your ability to communicate is critical to land your message across. If you're looking for cost, if you're looking for budget, your ability to be able to articulate why you want to get certain costs or certain budgets, it becomes critical, right? So it's a key skill, and you find that people who communicate well typically are able to get exactly what they want and drive their agenda. So it's a key skill, and I encourage young people to actually get that skill.
That is brilliant. Yeah. Now, development finance. I mean, a lot of lives depend on what you do. Does that, in a way, scare you, or does it drive you? How do you feel about it?
It drives me. I think, throughout my career, I always knew that I would like to end up in a role that allows me to have a bit of impact. So I was constantly searching for, a role that, I could, apply my trade, but also make an impact on people's lives. So unfortunately enough, the model that we've got under ESD has actually enabled us to lend to businesses that we wouldn't have lent to, and to drive employment. Because at the end of the day, you want to lend to these businesses so they can operate, so they can employ people, so they can grow the GDP of the economies that they operate in, and that's such a positive story, right? So very fortunate that the framework that we've got under enterprise and supply chain development has been working very well, and we've got many success stories which I can talk about.
Brilliant. And now I know Absa operates in 12 countries.
Correct.
Majority of those are under your responsibility, right? Where you have a banking license or an
Absolutely.
operation.
Absolutely.
That's what, a total of about 8, 9?
It's about 9 countries. Correct.
And you travel quite often.
I do.
Right. What does being in the field tell you that, or teach you that hanging out in these boardrooms all the time doesn't?
Yeah. So a few lessons, Yatin. I think probably the one is the resilience of African SMEs. You go to a market like Zimbabwe, there's no credit in that economy. So SMEs have to figure out how to survive, running cash businesses effectively, right? How to lend to each other, so it's a very interesting market when you travel to a place like Zimbabwe, right? You go further into West Africa, for instance, exorbitant interest rate, right? So interest rates are typically high teens into the 20s. So the cost of capital is very expensive for SMEs, but they still have, some way of, borrowing at those high rates and running, sustainable businesses, albeit very small. So resilience is something that I pick up. Innovation, I think, is also there, especially in East Africa. I think I traveled to Kenya, April, and the businesses that I met there and the stuff that they're doing, really solving for local problems that are big enough to actually create businesses, was blown away by some of the businesses I met in East Africa and in Kenya. So innovation is there as well. But I think sadly, Yatin, it's the fact that also SMEs still require a lot of help on the continent. And I think South African SMEs actually a little bit fortunate because they can get onto ESD programs, they can get grants, they can get concessionary loans, and those formalized frameworks are not available elsewhere on the continent, right? So I think that's one advantage that South Africa has got. It's really thought long and hard about how to support SMEs. It's not perfect, we're not there yet, but I think it's certainly better than what I pick up outside of South Africa.
So with the SMEs that you work with, how does Absa play an enabling role or a facilitation role? Because on the one hand, all banks need to manage risk, right? You have to de-risk these sort of investments, let's call it, into SMEs. We don't call it loans. I always like to think of when you're investing in an SME, you're investing in a future giant. That's the way to approach this, And how do you enable that with that mindset, managing your risk in the process?
Yeah. So the model, it's quite a simple framework, to be honest with you. And a lot of people talk about that SMEs lack access to finance. And I find that's actually not what they lack. It's access to market. You need to be able to sell something to somebody, right? And that's the model, right? So how do you plug SMEs into corporate value chains, right? So how do you make them suppliers, contractors within large corporate value chains as a start? And once they have that marketplace, they will get a contract, they'll get a purchase order, and it's easy for us to then finance on the back of those contracts or purchase orders. So that's the one side of the equation, or the one side of the ecosystem, right? But you also have a big need for distribution networks across Africa, right? So especially when you're talking to the FMCG sector, most of those clients are worried about, how do I get my goods out to wherever they're required? So the distribution networks offer also huge opportunities for SMEs to become distributors, retailers, wholesalers of large FMCG anchors. But what's interesting there is then it's a data play. So it's about understanding how much is a particular business purchasing, how often are they doing it? And if you actually crunch that data, you can actually come up with a credit decision just based on how much he's purchasing. So it's really looking at innovative models. On the supply chain side, you've got a guaranteed cash flow and you can finance on the back of that. On the distribution side, you look at the data of how much are they purchasing, how much are they selling. You can make a credit decision on the back of that, and had huge success, especially in East Africa on the distribution chain, and in Southern Africa and West Africa on the supply chain, particularly in the mining sector, telco sector, even the agricultural sector as well.
Yeah, no, I get that, if there's future cash flows, right, then they're bankable, because you can monetize those future cash flows, through factoring and others.
Yes.
But for the young founder out there right now who doesn't know about all these mechanisms,
Yes.
what would you say to them in terms of getting going? What should they have in mind in terms of being bankable?
Yeah.
Like in a year's time?
In a year's time, yeah.
What are the basics they need to start thinking about in their business plans?
Yeah, so when we look about, bankability, we can start off with the basics, right? Can you plug yourself into a supply chain? Can you plug yourself into a distribution chain? That's you can start off there. I think critical is to understand, if you have chosen a particular sector, how does that sector operate? If you're pinpointing a specific company, what is the supply chain strategy of that company? Do they have an ESG strategy? Do they have a localization strategy? Do they have preferential procurement, right? And then you can try and then position your business based on what that company is looking to achieve, right? And once you get into a supply chain, or once you get into a distribution chain, be finance ready. We always talk about the fact of finance readiness. So what do I mean by that? Have a basic set of management accounts. Not for the bank. You need to know what's happening within your business. That's what management accounts teach you, right? If you've got financials, that's great. But simple things: be tax compliant. Don't have defaults. If you have a default, make sure you can tell your financier what is your plan to, are you servicing that bad debt, and what happened that you actually have that default. So be finance ready, get yourself into a supply chain. And I think that's the basic principles I can give to SMEs that want to get into a supply or distribution chain program.
And that makes sense, not only for your own, having control of your own business, and not only to present to credit committees of banks, but also to the big players in these supply chains, these corporates that you may want to attach yourself to. And you've always recommended that as a good way for an SME to gain leverage in a particular, call it supply chain, is to attach themselves or partner with the majors.
Absolutely.
How do they do this practically? Reach out, or spend time in conferences, or what should they do?
Listen, I mean, when you're looking for business, there are many ways of skinning a cat. I think a lot of corporates would have supplier days, and sometimes they're actually open, so you can go and you can attend, you can listen. You have corporates that do what they call distribution or dealer network days, so they're looking at their dealers. And information is readily available now. That's the beauty about the world that we're living in now, right? Desktop research, most companies publish financials, they publish their strategies, whether it's procurement, whether it's the ESG addendas, what are they doing around socialization, financial inclusion, job creation. Do the desktop research. LinkedIn is a great platform to understand who's making decisions, who's in those entities. Try and reach out to them. And make sure you've got a good business plan, you've got a good product, and you've thought about things, you've consulted. One of the key things which I always tell SMEs is the importance of having advisory boards. At Absa, we've got a board that, drives what is our strategy, not really looking at the now, but how is Absa panning out in 5 years, right? SMEs must try and set up advisory boards. And when I say the term advisory board, people get scared, but it could just be your brother who's an accountant, or your cousin who's a lawyer, or your mom who's a teacher and understands education, right? Just set up people and bounce ideas off them in terms of, what should I be doing with my business? And the benefit of that is massive. That's how large corporates, run their businesses, right? We've got massive boards, and we've got very experienced people, that sit on those boards. An SME within your own network, you probably have a lot of experienced people that can help you with your business. So set up advisory boards that really will help you in terms of your sustainability, your growth plans, what should you be thinking about? Because not everybody knows everything, right? But, reach out to people, set up an advisory board for yourself.
You touch on something that's very close to my heart. Yeah. I always say it takes a village to raise a child. This child is raised by a global village. Yeah. And for me, I believe your network is your net worth, right? And I even learned from you, David, how to communicate better.
Absolutely.
It's a message that I think, those listening out there that's running their own business, these founders, take to heart. Don't believe you can do it all on your own. And for various reasons, I see founders doing that, whether it's, the founder syndrome. I started this is my business. I know more than the other person. Also, I don't want to give away too much. Don't know if I trust them. We need to break through that.
It's the downfall of a lot of SMEs. This is my business. I'm not going to consult. I'm not going to get advice. And you find SMEs that are thriving have got very smart minds around them, because not only can they point them to, this is the next future thing. Are you thinking about it? This is where you can get finance. Hey, did you hear about this program that's offering grants or concessionary finance, right? That just sets up SMEs for sustainability.
Totally. It's a limiting belief in that, and it's known as the founder syndrome, and we need to, SMEs listening out there, just break yourself out of it. It's your own enslavement.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, there's a lot of ambitious young people. Let's move from SMEs just for a moment to where you sit now, at the apex, at a big corporate. For young professionals in corporate out there right now, what's your 30-second advice to them on the things they need to manage about themselves right now, spend some energy in terms of their personal development, things to master that they're going to need in the next 10 years?
Yeah, so I've got a slightly different, approach to that. As opposed to skills, for me, it's about values. When we were part of the Barclays group, we launched a values campaign. It was called Rises, right? And our values were all around this acronym of Rises, which was respect, integrity, service, excellence, stewardship, right? The three that I would encourage young people to kind of focus on is, number one, service. So understand who your stakeholders are and provide a superior service to them, right? So if you're in finance, maybe your stakeholder is your CFO. Are you providing a superior service, to him? So understand your stakeholders, provide a superior service. Second is excellence, and I've always loved this value of excellence, to say you must strive for excellence in everything that you are doing. Whether you produce an excellent piece of work will always be told by you striving to actually, produce excellent work. So even if you don't get there, the fact that you're striving for it will show up in your work, right? So excellence is key, and excellence must be in everything, that you're doing. If you're given a mediocre task, and I remember one of the tasks I was given when I started my career at Absa was effectively to go and investigate what we call cash breaks. So that's when you've done a trade and another bank hasn't settled you, and you got to pick up the phone and call these banks. Why haven't you settled? This kind of stuff, right? So for a CA being given a task like that, it might not seem as if, this is a glorified task, but you got to approach that with excellence and actually try and get the job done, right? Because that's going to lead you to your next job. So show up with excellence, whatever you've been, or whatever task you've been given to do. And then the last one, Yatin, is stewardship. So leave things better than you found them, right? So you get given a task, do it. Make sure you've done that task, that the next person who comes, maybe you've made it more efficient. So always things leave better than you find them, And especially, I know youngsters like to move jobs a whole lot more than we do. I've been here 18 years, so I'm part of the furniture here. But if you get a job for 1 year, when you leave that job, make sure you've left it better than you found it, whatever it is that you're doing. So the importance of stewardship is really, really important. So values for me, and I think youngsters or the Gen Zs must live according to a certain value set that defines who they are and actually becomes part of their personal brand.
I love that. Service, excellence, stewardship. Beautiful. The top 3 from David. Awesome. Before we go on, I should tell you, I started this channel to share the real stories behind the climb for the next generation of leaders and builders coming up. Now, if that's something you believe in too, please subscribe and come along for the ride. It's free and it means a lot. Okay, let's continue. Now, I want to zoom out a little into something I know we both are passionate about, our beautiful continent of Africa.
Right.
Critical minerals. We're sitting on a wealth of trillions of dollars worth of it. The world needs it. For far too long, we hear the story about we don't capture enough of the value here. Beneficiation. We've heard it. I mean, through my entire 21 years in mining. Shed some light on that. There's no silver bullet, but what should we be doing to start tending towards improvement? Because it has to be incremental.
It has to be. I think, Yachin, key to that is infrastructure, particularly hard infrastructure. So for you to beneficiate goods, there's certain types of infrastructure that you need in place. Energy is key. So
Foundational.
And unfortunately, I think 30 countries in Africa are still experiencing severe load shedding. I heard a stat, and I've been hearing this stat for the past 10 years, that 600 million Africans still don't have access to electricity. So even the basic domestic electricity is not there. It's then difficult to get electricity or energy at an industrial, point of view. So energy is key. You've got to have strong energy infrastructure. South Africa is fortunate that, we've come through the curve now and are at a slightly better stage. But, you saw what happened when we had load shedding in this country. It crippled businesses. It crippled, the economy. I think our GDP growth took a significant knock because of the lack of energy. So that's critical infrastructure that you need to have in place. I also think the other infrastructure is around logistics. So, and particularly rail as well as ports, even road networks, right? So how do you get the inputs you require to beneficiate? How do you get them into the country and to the site where you're beneficiating? How do you get the finished goods from where you've beneficiated it back to where they need to go to, right? So road networks, rail networks, port efficiencies becomes critical. And these are a lot of the problems that, South Africa has experienced over the past 10 years. And I think we are certainly turning the corner in terms of, infrastructure being able to support, the economy the size of South Africa. So other African countries need to think through that. So I think infrastructure is key. I think the other one is skills as well. Your ability to import skills. You look at a market like Dubai, which has really been great in terms of importing skills, and as a result of that, you have different industries sort of popping out, whether it is finance industry, whether it is aviation, your ability to import skills. And I always feel, a country like Botswana, very small country, they have to be able to import skills into that country so they can beneficiate some of the commodities that they have there. They've got diamonds, they've got coal, they've got copper. But if they want to beneficiate, you've got to be able to import skills to be able to help you do that.
Right. So infrastructure and skills.
Absolutely.
Energy drives industry, which drives the economy, isn't it? Because without energy, you don't have an industry. And without industry, there's no economy.
And without the economy, there's no jobs. And we're stuck.
We need to fix it at that foundational level. Now, we're seeing globally with geopolitics and over time, recently, the last maybe 10 years, we have seen a shift of capital moving from west to the east now. And South Africa, fortunate to be part of BRICS, I believe, because these are very important partners for us. With that, there's a spotlight. I don't know if you've noticed on Africa recently by the East, right? It's been happening.
Yes.
I think that will open up a lot of opportunity because you got the holders of capital looking at a continent that is, endowed with resources that's needed for things like, most importantly, in my heart, is the the energy transition. And that's all happening. You see the stuff that China and India are doing. I mean, they're steaming ahead with this transition. What openings do you see for entrepreneurs in Africa? Where should they be looking, and what's coming soon?
So I think you mentioned the just energy transition, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's quoted that it is the largest reallocation of capital in modern economic history. In South Africa alone, I think it's 1.5 trillion rand that is required to get South Africa transition, right? So that's a massive amount of capital. Where should entrepreneurs be looking to position themselves so they can be part of this, capital deployment, capital reallocation? And you've seen in South Africa, I think you've seen lots of SMEs now involved in the solar business, solar installation, logistics, repairs and maintenance. And I think that's a good start. But I think we actually have to unpack the value chains of renewable energy. I mean, we started with solar, but there's wind energy, there's, different types of energy that will be involved. We need to actually spend a lot of time unpacking what those value chains look like. What are the skills that's required for you to participate in those value chains? Capacitating SMEs so they can actually participate in this. So I think there is more work ahead of us than kind of like behind us and where we are at the moment, in terms of understanding what are the opportunities for SMEs in the renewable energy value chain.
Right. Brilliant. I firmly believe an enabler can be better intra-Africa trade. We are famously bad at that as Africa.
Yeah.
What would you say? How can we address it meaningfully in a way? I mean, what's the root cause of it? Is it a mistrust, or what is it? Different cultures?
From what I've seen, Africa is not actually producing a lot of goods. So there's problem number one. If you look at the SADC region, it's, you've got South Africa, which is kind of like the powerhouse. And I think if you look at intra-Africa trade, most of it is happening within Southern Africa. And most of it is happening with South Africa sending goods to its neighboring countries within SADC, right? So Africa has to get to a point where they are producers of goods and not consumers. You can't trade with each other if you're not producing anything. So problem number one, right? But I think people are starting to think about it. You've had the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which has now been launched. I think it's been ratified by about 50 countries at the moment. But I think there's only like 8, and I could be wrong, because the last time I checked, it was only about 8 to 10 countries that were actually making use of the free trade, agreement for various reasons. And I think there's actually other trade agreements that are in place. I think SADC has got a trade agreement. East Africa has got a trade agreement. West Africa. But I think the core of it, Yatin, is we've got to start producing more. We've got to build the infrastructure that I spoke about, energy, logistics networks, so we can, be actually produce goods competitively. And I think once we do that, I think there will be much more opportunity for us to start trading with each other. And what's also nice is that I think geopolitics have shown just how, if you don't have partners close to you that can supply you with goods, you could end up in a very sticky situation. You've seen what's happened with oil and the Strait of Hormuz, and us not being able to get oil into Africa. So then you look at a Dangote who's built a refinery. That now becomes key as a potential supplier of oil into that West African region. And if you have good infrastructure, potentially even out of West Africa into Southern Africa. So your ability to have neighbors that are friends is very critical in these days and times.
You spoke about, I've read one of your articles, you talked about the hub and spoke supplier sort of network.
Correct.
SADC is doing it well.
Yeah.
If we can have more of these hubs and spokes across the continent, I can almost visualize how this would just create a web of trade ultimately.
Absolutely.
And in that is where then the SMEs can start to flourish, right?
I think the thinking there was really around how do you create expertise within certain markets, countries, jurisdictions. And I think I was reading, like in Asia, Southeast Asia, very good at doing this. They call it, is it the Asian factory, where even if you're manufacturing a pair of shoes, different jobs are done in different countries. So one country could just be doing the laces, the other country is doing the soles, the other country is doing the actual, shoe in itself. And it's really about taking expertise. Where do you have competitive advantage, and using that competitive advantage to plug into this hub and spoke model, right? So if you look at SADC, South Africa, I think, has got high scale manufacturing capability. If you look at the cars we assemble, so there's a lot of manufacturing capability in South Africa. You look at a country like Mozambique, which has got large reserves of gas. That gas should be used to provide energy into the region, right? You can look at ports in Namibia. You can look at the Lobito corridor that will take goods from DRC or central part of Africa into the western part of the globe. So if you look at SADC alone, who is competitively placed to do what, and let them do that. So Africa can manufacture, Mozambique can provide energy, Namibia, Angola can provide good trade ports into the west, Tanzania, Mozambique on the other side could provide good trade ports into the east, right? But it's all about coming together and having these types of discussions.
I was going to say, what would it take for it to become from a theoretical to an executable? What would it take?
So bodies like SADC play a key role in this, and I'm fortunate enough to interlock with a few people that work in SADC, and the thinking is there. I think it's about more action. There's huge amounts of funding that's required, right? So how do you even create a development bank that funds, infrastructure development across SADC? I know we've got, DBSA, but how do we have more of those that are earmarked to kind of make SADC competitive from a production point of view, from a logistics point of view, from an energy point of view?
And, I believe there's not just the institutions, but our entrepreneurs on the continent, the Dangotes and the Motsepes, all have a big role to play in this. And I think these more should come together in an ecosystem with the corporates. And I think we can really accelerate this.
I've seen Dangote. I think he did a trip down to Southern Africa. He was in Zimbabwe. He was in Zambia. Seeing this on LinkedIn. And with the capital, or maybe with the balance sheet that he possesses, maybe trying to fund projects, energy projects in Zimbabwe. So yeah, you do see pockets of it. If we could just do it more, and people with large pools of capital in Africa, they're the ones who should be, developing Africa. And we'll take help from, our friends to the east and our friends to the west, but we've got friends in Africa who can absolutely drive this.
Yeah, and our friends in the east, when they do come in here, we must ensure we're not making the same old mistakes again, The value is being exported. Because I think we're now a bit more alive to this. We know exactly what we want to transform away from the old way, the old African way, to new Africa.
Absolutely. The value, make sure the value is not exported. Make sure you can bring your supply chain. So they can finance projects, but the supply chain has to be local. It has to have an SME component. It has to have a youth component, right? And that is where we can really benefit.
No, I'm talking to an equipment supplier, and it got me to start looking at our policies and how we work. And actually, we're heading in the right direction. There's a reason why you need to have a local partner and be at least having control of the entity that's here. So that is not a case of, you bring in your equipment and you go. But in an industry like mining, more critical than having the equipment here is having the after-sales service.
Absolutely.
And that's why you need a team here. That's how you beneficiate that value. And if we do more of that, I believe there's going to be a host of, roles for SMEs.
Absolutely.
That's going to open up.
Absolutely. The mining sector, I think, has been particularly good, at this. So we work with a lot of mining companies across the continent. I think by virtue of, their operations, their ability to show impact in communities, in the countries that they're operating in, is front and center of many mining CEOs, right? And because of that, we've seen some really good supplier development programs in the mining sector. I mean, the Anglo-American Zimele program is one to mention. And that program started, I think, in 1989, way before there was any legislation around supplier development and ESD and that kind of thing. So I think it's at the core of a lot of mining companies to develop the network, the community, the economy around them. And I think other sectors can certainly take a page in the book of the mining companies. So local content is becoming very prevalent. I've spent a lot of time in Zambia this year, copper being a key critical mineral required for the energy transition. Zambia is the second largest producer of copper, and they've just passed legislation that 20% of the procurement from any mine has to go to local companies. And that is going to increase to 40%, I think, by 2030, right? So lots of activity around how do you capacitate suppliers in Zambia to be part of this, copper run, if I can call it that, and get more local businesses plugged into those value chains. So yeah, mining sector, I think, are doing some great work, and other sectors can certainly take a page of that book.
Totally agree. Now, David, you chair, or you deputy chair of the Just Transition Coalition.
Correct.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that's a coalition that recently been launched. We launched in May, so last month, funded by the World Bank. They've been a great partner. And the coalition is really trying to advocate for inclusion of women, youth, marginalized groups in the just energy transition, right? So we've spoken about 1.5 trillion required in South Africa to get the transition done. How do women, youth, marginalized groups play a role in this? So it's an advocacy group. We're looking at policy, we're looking at financing, we're looking at governance to just try and get a greater inclusion of marginalized groups in this massive transition that's taking place.
And you're doing it at the development stage so that they're not an afterthought.
Absolutely.
And that's so critical, that you design the policy for this marginalized group.
A lot of work that we have to do ahead of us. I think looking at the policy, looking at the money that's coming into this country, is there some that's ring-fenced for these marginalized groups, right? Can they get concessionary loans? Can they get grants? So a lot of work ahead of us, and daunting task, but I'm certainly up for it.
Excellent. Well, in closing then, David, if you were to put up a billboard that for every young African entrepreneur to think about, what would that be?
What would that be? Interesting question, Yatin. Maybe for the SMEs, that's out there. It's effectively, we want to see them grow. And I always say this role is actually about developing mid-sized companies and the next future corporates of Africa. That's what we're actually trying to do, right? So how do you take these SME companies, how do you provide the support around their network so they could be mid-sized corporates and potentially large corporates, in the future? And we've seen a lot of these businesses that we've supported, throughout time, whether it's in East Africa, it's coffee traders, whether it's people involved in the mining value chain. So it's really about the support that's required for them to grow. As they grow, they employ more people, they contribute more to the economy. So effectively, just to see SMEs grow and not remain SMEs, but become the next future corporates of Africa.
Excellent. Now, to the global investor looking for a return in Africa, there's been a lot of people are still learning about this continent. What are the common misconceptions that global investors have about Africa?
Yeah, I think it's the risk trade-off. It's the understanding of risk, not even to global investors, even to local credit committees, right? You have to spend time on the continent, and I'm fortunate enough to do a lot of that, to see the innovation, to see the businesses that are thriving, spend time on the continent. I think that's really the key advice that I would have.
Boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground.
Yeah, see for yourself.
Absolutely.
And you do that very well. May you continue. David, I thank you so much for being here, and I thank you for your time.
Lovely. Thank you, Yatin.
I'm going to take away service. Always be, as if you're a business owner, like I am, service is important. Always be excellent, and always think about stewardship. leave the place better than you found it. If you've made it all the way here, you're exactly who I made this for. Do me one favor, please. Subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. It's absolutely free. It'll take a second and it'll mean the world to me. I'll see you in the next episode of Dealmaker Diary.